Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming out for the Exeter Community Charrette. We were thrilled to have an opportunity to be in this incredible town for the last 3 days to explore middle market workforce housing. If we haven't met, my name is Robin Comstock. I'm the Executive Director of the Workforce Housing Coalition. A little bit of background about us. We are a coalition that was formed around 17 years ago to address middle market housing for the workforce. We are a 501c3, we are charitable, and we serve 54 communities in the seacoast of southern Maine and New Hampshire to help communities sort through the idea that having an array, a broad inventory of different kinds of housing that include middle market housing is very important to the social and economic systems of every community of the seacoast. We also think that the seacoast itself has a very unique in and of itself dynamic as it pertains to the economy and the society as a regional entity, separate from state borders, separate from other geographic concerns, that the seacoast has its own social and economic system. We have several signature programs I would like to mention to you because I'm an opportunist, and I know that you're involved in middle market housing, that we are also holding a Seacoast Housing Summit on November 2nd at UNH Huddleston Hall at 7:30 in the morning, and we'll have a very broad and rich conversation about middle market housing then too. But we're here today, or the last 3 days, in Exeter to talk about middle market housing and to explore opportunities and concepts that are possible for Exeter. We use the model that is called a charrette, which means the community comes together to talk about the community for the future. Our first day was on Wednesday evening. We spent about 2 hours with numerous residents and experts in housing and design and community design, and learned a lot about Exeter today, Exeter in the past, and Exeter in the future. We heard the dislikes and likes of community members. We heard where the community wants to go, what residents are thinking about, what they find of interest, and what they want to avoid. These flip chart papers behind me are actually all of the comments of those residents throughout the course of that 2-hour community-wide discussion. It was a phenomenal discussion, and everyone who came out that night, I want to genuinely thank you for being here, and then for most of you coming back tonight as well. So we took all those comments of Wednesday night and the rich conversation, and we brought it to the table this morning. We have a core of architects, landscape designers, engineers, and other experts, including financial feasibility, all who came together at 7:30 this morning and were hard at work as early as 8 o'clock, talking about what they heard at the community listening session, what the residents told me, what they see, what they feel, and to integrate all of that into their knowledge in their particular unique professions. This group of volunteers worked all day developing a collection of concepts to present back to you tonight in what we refer to as the Community Reveal Report. What I want you to know is that, again, we are a not-for-profit. This is a service we provide the communities of the Seacoast at no charge. We are funded entirely by sponsorship and through membership dollars and charitable grants. And we, again, use an army of volunteers who come out and donate their time for 3 days for this process. I'd like to therefore sincerely thank our sponsors who made this program possible. They are Optima Bank and Trust, which is our presenting sponsor, Riverwoods, Exeter Hospital, the Exeter Area Chamber of Commerce. I'd like to sincerely thank the Exeter Inn, the Green Bean, Las Olas, and Me and Ollie's. And with that, I'd like to introduce you to one of our team leads who will overview the conclusions and recommendations this team made after working just about 10 hours today on hopefully presenting you with concepts that will serve you well as you move into the future. So, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Shannon Arthur from TMS Architects. Thank you, Shannon.
Thank you. Thank you, Robin, and thank you guys for coming. And first of all, I wanted to thank the group of people that were here today to help with this. I was hoping we'd have 50 or 60 people here tonight, but since you guys are here, you get to make the decision. So since you came, whatever you decide is going to happen. So the way we're going to approach this is we're going to go through the presentation and kind of give you an outline of what we discussed today and some of the diagrams that we've come up with. And then what we'll do is we'll talk a little bit about the monetary component, some of the challenges that we found, some of the opportunities. We didn't necessarily solve the problem of how to create workforce housing on this particular lot, but we came up with, I think, some tools that'll actually allow us to help the town of Exeter or help other towns to at least understand how we might approach trying to get affordable housing. We have some good options, and I think we have something that is pretty exciting, but it actually is going to take some thinking, forward thinking, from the members of the community, neighbors, as well as the staff at Exeter in terms of the political front and the planning and zoning board front. So I'm going to try to keep this to about 15 minutes. So if you guys have questions, you can raise your hand, and if you have a good question, I'll answer it. If not, we can wait till the end. No, I think I'll be okay. Oh yeah, I see it. May not be on. All right, we'll try it without it. See if it comes on. So, the site that we picked is at the corner of Bow Street and Clifford Street. And for reference, just at the very top of the screen, there's kind of a green roof. That's the Blue Moon Cafe. So to give you a reference point of where we're looking. The site itself is outlined in red, and some of the other lines you're seeing represent contours, electrical, water lines. So basically, we use this as our site map for the project. That's right. Thank you. All right, great. So again, Blue Moon for reference. Red line represents the site that we were playing with today. It's approximately a half of an acre, which we thought we'd actually be able to do some pretty cool opportunities, and I think we did, but we also found that half of an acre is kind of challenging for workforce housing, because in order to get workforce housing to work in a downtown urban lot, you need to have density. Density means that we have to have probably more units than most people would be comfortable with. So some of the options that we played with today kind of ran the gamut in terms of 8 units up to 26 units. And so between those scenarios, we were able to achieve better unit pricing, not necessarily market pricing, but affordable house pricing. And in some instances, we actually had to combine the two, meaning we had to offer an opportunity where there was some affordable housing as well as some market rate housing in this particular project. So option 1 is what we call a townhome option. And for reference, Bow Street's here, Clifford's here, Blue Moon is up here just a bit. So we turned it just a little bit for orientation on our purposes. So in this particular case, I'm going to bounce a little bit, but some of the discussions that we talked about on Wednesday night were whether or not parking was on the street, in the back, how we deal with scale, how we deal with aesthetics, how people in the neighborhood would like to see either porches or no cars on blocks. So all those pieces are important, but for the discussion that we'll have tonight, we tried to address quantity in terms of density, height, how we address the building, and how many units we can get there. Yes? Well,
I live there on South Street, and I cannot orient myself. The Blue Moon's up top. The Blue Moon's on Bow Street.
Blue Moon's right here.
Yeah, but that's not according to your map that you
So Bow
said.
Street's right here,
That's Bow.
and
So,
Clifford's this way.
and where's Franklin?
It's parallel with Bow.
Right out here.
Okay, I still don't. What's that building there? That big one?
This-
No, that one right
That's our
there.
site right now. That's
Oh,
that's
What is that? oh, okay, okay, I got you now.
Do you have your bearings?
I do. I live right there.
The house on the bottom right is on the corner of Bow and South.
Okay, gotcha. Yep.
Right across from that is the condos, and the house on the right.
The brick condos?
Yes,
Yeah, I live right next to
they're down on the bottom right.
Yeah, okay, gotcha now.
That's a good question. So we've got everybody's orientated now. All right. So in this particular instance, we rotated the plan slightly. So Blue Moon's up in the upper left-hand corner. In this instance, we have units. Actually, no, it's not on. All right, that's better. All right. So along Clifford Street, we have 5 units. we have a parking space in the front as well as a parking garage under the building. So this is one of those options that we actually did kind of a modification where we didn't necessarily get 2-car garages, but we got 2 spaces, which is something that was important to our review, was to understand or to try to make these as close to what most people would like, meaning most people have 2 cars. We know that there are some zoning opportunities for either 1 or 1.5 spaces, but in this particular instance, we tried for 2. So if you come down and you go down Bode Street, basically the building sets back a little bit. Again, the same concept with a parking space on the surface or surface exterior, as well as one inside the building. And then if you continue down Bode Street, you come into the lot, and basically we have 4 units in the back. These 4 units have 2-car garage under. And so in this case, we were able to make them a little bit wider, 24 feet versus 20 feet here. We've maximized the site out in the sense that there's a lot of buildings here, but in terms of the capacity, we basically have the 13 units, or let's see, 13 units that we have here, parking at the ground level, and then 2 floors of living up above. So this would basically satisfy or be very comparable to the other mass houses that are massing shapes of houses in Exeter itself, in this particular area. We looked at going higher, adding a 4th or a 5th floor on this. Obviously, that's a contention that we'd have to deal with. The problem is getting the circulation for basically the people up to the 4th or 5th floor. In this particular case, you'd have an entry door, you'd go up some stairs, and then you'd access your 2nd floor, take another set of stairs up to the 3rd floor. If we tried to get more floors on this, what would happen is we would either have to have exterior stairs and elevators to basically get those units to work. So we kind of stopped at this particular level. To give you a sense of what it might look like, this is on Bow Street, and we took these photos with a phone, so we'll clean these up. We have originals here, so if you guys want to come and see them after, you can. Clarity's a little better. Bow Street's here. Basically, these are the buildings along Bow Street with the garage doors, and then this is the building in the back as you kind of drive north and kind of turn into the property. We can play with all sorts of styles, but the idea is it's kind of a 2.5 to 3-story building, 2 layers or 2 floors of living, and then basically the 1st floor garage. Actually, before I do that. So option 1 is roughly about $450,000 a unit. So for reference that we talked about the other night, 309 was kind of that threshold of the affordable housing. And also for reference, by right, this particular lot can handle 5 units, 5 residential units. And we think that the market value for that property with 5 units would be about $495,000 for the units. Again, way over our affordable housing amount, but it's a start in terms of how we tested this out. You say 450,000 for this version, 495 for by right. All right. So, option 2, what we decided to do is play with parking at the ground level. And one of the nice things about this site is that the grade is higher along Clifford, and then as you go down Bow, it drops about 3 to 4 feet. So in this case, we decided we'd dig the site out a little bit, have parking down a little lower, so that way you could have almost like a townhouse effect where you might come up 2 or 3 feet from the sidewalk and into the house. So the garage is level, the garage deck is basically half in the earth and half out of the earth. In this particular instance, we have 44 spaces of parking. Some of it is underneath the building, and then some of it's outside the building. Lots a little bit more dense in terms of its footprint, and then the internal access for the garage as well as the or the parking here in the back is basically a kind of a 2-way component inside the property. So you would come in this way, get to your spot, and then come back out onto Bow Street. This is a concept of what happens on the living space up above that area. And so in this particular case, we can end up getting about, 26 units in this particular instance. So the idea is that we have some internal circulation with some stairs and elevator. This starts to give us the density that we need. It also maximizes the site in terms of its footprint. This is a potential sketch of what it would look like from Bow Street here, looking back at the site. So this would be the entrance into the parking component. And then we would play with the massing to create style, in fitting in keeping with Exeter. This particular option was about $492,000 a unit. So we saved a few dollars, but not a lot. After we had gone through all these versions, 492.
All those units is 492.
Yeah, and the reason is that the parking deck or the parking structure to allow all those 44 spaces to exist underneath it requires a pretty good expense up front. And so that expense is shared by the rest of the units, but it's a big number to kind of put in place to then allow you to go up. Now, yes, sir.
Do you know the square footage in those units?
I think these 1,600 square feet in those units?
Around 1,400 square feet,
Yeah.
going for 490,000. Right?
Yeah, not ideal.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to jump a little bit in the sense that after we went through, we actually came up with about 7.5 versions today. And we're only going to show you 4 because a couple of them just didn't make sense or we need to test them out a little further. But what we did do is we came back and we said, okay, how can we make this work with affordable housing? And one of the things that we came up with is that we could potentially start to deviate and say a certain number of these units in this complex are affordable housing, and then the remaining ones are market value housing. We originally dismissed that because we wanted to see or test out if we could get them all affordable housing, because that was our main goal. If we decided to say that 4 units are affordable housing at $300,000 a unit, we would then have about 22 units that are $528,000 a unit. Again, this is not ideal, but it starts to give us an opportunity of how we might play this and make it work. So the third option is what we call the mixed use option with parking under as well as behind. What we did here is along Clifford Street and Bow Street, we have commercial space. Now the commercial space becomes an economic opportunity for the lot. We still have the parking component because basically the deck is under this whole thing, again with parking in the back, same concept in and out here. It gets expensive because the parking itself or the deck itself is still a number that we have to contend with like we did in the previous option. In this case, we have about 8,800 square feet of commercial, which could be a great opportunity. The way the site works is it's higher here on this side than on Bow Street. And so you could have 1, 2, maybe 3 or 4 different commercial spaces that kind of step and stagger down kind of the 4 or 5 feet along Bow Street. So again, we can use the massing and the scale to be in keeping with what the downtown Exeter has. Option 3, this one we called the live-work option because the opportunity is depending on what type of businesses here, you could have someone who could live up above it. But in this case, this was the most expensive option because of the parking deck and because of the commercial space. We're about $670,000 a unit. So not ideal at all. Going up. If we do the same option where we take a chunk of affordable housing, or a couple of units, say 4, and make them $300,000 units, then the remaining units, basically about 530,000 square feet. And the numbers play a little bit with the commercial and how we adjust that. So again, we still haven't created an opportunity where either the whole site is affordable or the majority of it's affordable. But we have an option. So this one was just a couple more pictures of this particular option with some parking spaces. This is an elevation of what this would look like from Bow Street. So again, kind of similar that you saw earlier, entrance into the parking component, commercial storefront down here, and then upper levels of living. In this case, we showed it with a flat roof to test it out, again, in keeping with some of the other architecture that you might see here along the main streets of Exeter. All right, option 4 is what we called alternative construction. Now this one was actually where we decided to deviate, and we went with a container type house, or shipping container. So this alternative is basically different from the conventional type of construction. In this case, we have 8 units, 4 along Clifford, so you have 2 parking spaces in front of each, and then there's an entrance here off of Bow with 4 spaces for 2 cars each for those units. Now what happens here is we have much more density in the middle of the lot It's a little challenging because you got this kind of row house effect, which some people may or may not like. Basically, these units, and I think we got the square footage is off on this, it's basically about 1340. So I think, Rob, you're missing a 1 there. So basically about 1,300 square feet for each of these units. And the idea is that you would walk in here, you'd have a first floor with a bedroom, and then you take a second floor up and you'd have 2 or 3 bedrooms depending on the layout. So this model is a little smaller than what you've seen before in terms of some of the units, but it's not too far off. We had 1,400, 1,600 square feet is what we were working with in the previous schemes that you saw. The look of this one potentially is, again, here's Bow Street. We've got parking here along Clifford that people kind of pull in, and then we have parking through the road that allows you to come down to this section here. Since these are alternative construction, we decided to treat them a little differently. It could be a little bit more modern in shape, but it could have shingle style, it could have clapboards, it could have barn board. I think architecturally it might be interesting. And one of the comments that came up at Wednesday's meeting was maybe trying to change up the architecture a little bit, and so that the older architecture or the existing architecture in Exeter stands out, and this might be a little bit different. So what we're starting to do is see, okay, how can we test the affordable housing component, maybe with a different style, different concept. One of the other notes from Wednesday night was having this stuff come in relatively quickly, be built pretty quickly, and then be off the site pretty quickly. So this allows or lends to this application. This particular concept runs around $307,000 a unit. So now we've just about, or we've actually hit the affordable housing component, but now we have some challenges in the sense that our architecture might be a little different. People may not be as excited about it. And so part of our discussion today was that traditional construction and traditional building on this particular lot, a half-acre lot, can't be achieved for affordable housing in the traditional manner. We have to find another way to do it, whether it's modular, containers, some sort of prefabrication, and being willing to change the architecture up a little bit. Brick costs a lot of money, so you do brick, then your numbers go up. So we felt that this was an interesting opportunity to play with. The other option that we looked at in terms of the layout was to go back and do the parking deck here and then actually put 12 of these units on top of the parking deck. That started to work. The pricing, though, went up, and so basically we ended up getting to about $390,000 a unit if we accommodated basically 44 parking spaces underneath. So, do you have any more? Oh, actually, you got one more in this one. Okay, so just to close out the container component. So, typical container, in this case, you're seeing some holes for windows. You're seeing a bunch of different architectural styles that you can do with these containers. This is obviously a little bit more modern. This is a little bit more consistent with what you might see in New Hampshire, maybe not everywhere, but it's a little hard to tell exactly where the containers are in this building. Whereas here, you can definitely tell where they are. So I guess kind of to wrap up where we ended up, I know I've kind of said parts of it. We came up with 4 options that we've presented tonight. Only one of them really achieves the workforce housing component. And it does that by doing the building construction a bit different, in a different way than what's typically done. The challenge is that we may find it hard to get a developer to do something like this and to take the risk of trying to make this happen. And so the other thing that we realized is that the half-acre site in an urban component is tough because you need to fit parking, which we tried to do in all these schemes, is to basically have all the parking we needed on site, at least for the residential. In the commercial option that you saw, we did not have parking associated with the commercial. If we had an acre site and we could do all of our parking on half of the acre and then all the building on an acre, then I think we could start to make most of these options work, because now we don't have that parking deck and we have the opportunity for a little bit more space. So as we get into these tight kind of lots in an urban environment, the ingress and egress of the lot, coupled with the size of the lot, really affords us the ability to go to density. And so density either means maximizing the site, it means going up to 4 or 5 stories, which we know is one of the comments or concerns, which we didn't want to test that out just yet. But that's really the best way to approach some of these sites, is to actually increase the density, go up levels. If we could, like I said, if we could put another floor on most of these units, or maybe I didn't say this, but I'll say it now. If we could put a floor on most of these options, another floor that adds another 8 or 10 or 12 units, now we'd start to be able to bring that price really close to the affordable component. So in closing from my presentation, if we did the status quo for the mass and kind of scale of these buildings, it's going to be really hard to do affordable housing in a really small lot. As soon as we start to grow the lot sizes a little bit, or we go up for density, or remove parking, then we can start to make this happen. So we didn't achieve our goal of getting 4 or 5 options of affordable housing, but we did feel that we achieved the opportunity to understand where the pitfalls are. And now what we can do is use that information to try to figure out how to get to the affordable component. So, you know, we were hoping to have examples show you, but in this case, I think the process has helped us to determine there's some pretty tricky situations in terms of these small lots and dealing with density and the politics in any town, especially in New Hampshire. New Hampshire's not an easy town for some of these newer age concepts, basically. But, so, not to be a downer, but anybody have any good positive questions? Oops, she's going to bring you the microphone.
So is it the zoning that drives the requirement of 2 parking spaces per unit?
Zoning we could do 1 or 1.5 or 2. So in this case, we did 2 as a kind of a concept on all of them just to see where we were. We could back some of that parking out, but when we did the economic model, having the parking removed, you know, like 1 per unit didn't affect the number drastically.
It doesn't drive the price down.
Right.
There are options that we did, as we did this, brought this forward, when we did the townhouse one, because we had a driveway and a garage, we could achieve that 2 per, and that's fine. When we went to the next one, which was the condo flats above the parking, we actually did 1.5 spaces per unit. So that included each unit and a visitor component, which pushes the limits of the Exeter zoning. Additionally, we did not pay attention to the side yard, any of the setbacks. We went to within 5 feet of the property line in all cases. And so the parking numbers we used, most of them were less than 2, probably about 1.5.
Well, the reason I ask is that one of the things that drove the project right next door to the town hall here was the concept of shared parking.
Yep.
It was a mixed-use building, and not everything had to be, you know.
In the mixed-use building that we did, we only had 21 spaces of parking. We had 26 units and only 21 parking spaces.
So it was a similar concept.
Yeah.
So there was shared parking.
Yeah, there had to be.
Yeah. Okay, so to what extent in that mixed-use concept does the parking drive the price? I was surprised that the price wasn't driven down more.
Yeah.
And can you explain that a little bit, and then I'll be quiet.
We actually, just to clarify.
Did I skip something?
In this one, the park, you can see the front half of if you imagine a 64-foot wide building with 20 feet of the back part of that building is being parking under. That's what the parking that's shown in the yellow, that's underneath the building. And then the rest of it is outside of the building. So that we didn't really, in this one we didn't have, other than the cantilever over it, we really didn't have a deck.
Right.
But we didn't have a lot of parking with it either. That particular option really pressed any zoning restrictions out the window in terms of parking setbacks. The thing we didn't do, as Shannon said, was we didn't go up more. So for instance, on this one, if we'd put another floor on with another 10 units, the model would have changed, but it probably wouldn't have fit in the neighborhood.
Right. There were comments the other night about, 2.5, 3 stories being the absolute max that people would accept.
That's right. And that's why you see all these elevations that we did to show that. But it's more we're testing the model, and we now see on a small thing like that parking, the balance between parking and development and height is the key thing.
And what were the costs per living unit on the mixed use again?
This one was unfortunately, it was higher because of the commercial aspect, was 671.
I don't understand that. Why wouldn't the commercial pull it down?
Can you respond to that? Udo was helping with Michael in terms of the economics.
Hello, I'm Ute, and yes, we talked about the commercial piece, and they are up to different building codes. So to build commercial space is more expensive than to build residential space. So we had to put a higher price point on the commercial. And when we priced it out, we thought $100 per square foot for the commercial to be sold in a condominium situation would probably be the price point. So we backed out the 880,000 from the total construction cost and then split it up. And yeah.
So things like fire suppression and things like that drive the
Exactly.
cost of the commercial space higher. I understand now. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question, Shannon and Robbie and team. Did you conclude that these models that you present to us tonight, in fact, could be raised if this community chose to do so? More floors could be added on these sample concepts so that they would meet the middle market range. Are these models
Sorry, Robbie's going to answer that.
We didn't actually do the math on it because we were focused in on what might work. The math needs to be done, but the deal is when when you have that footprint and you go up, there's no more room for parking. So as we go up, the parking gets more and more critical. And we talked about, well, what if we didn't do parking? What if we did parking remotely? Remote parking will drive up the cost because you have to pay for that. It may not be the sales cost, but it would be the cost of the people for living there. So in the long run, makes it, there's that. So getting that proper balance is the real key. If you could, I was just thinking, if for instance we did option 2 with the flats, and you could do one space per unit, then you could add another layer, then you may get there. And that little math problem would need to be done, which we might have Mike do, or these guys do before we actually do any publishing of it. But that's, yeah, I know.
Question?
I'm sorry. There's too much math.
Another point that we discussed was this year was the property that we were given to work with. But if you were to take this as a concept and maybe another property comes up where you have more room and you could address the parking outside of the building, you would also automatically reduce the building cost. So if you had an acre instead of half an acre, you would could actually reduce the cost of building because now you don't have to have structured parking inside the building.
You had also mentioned that if we were, as a community, deciding to go another level higher, another story higher, I think you said there'd be the addition of elevators, and so I have no idea, is that considerable, plus we'd be losing some parking, so you have a couple of detriments there. What kind of cost would the elevators produce for us? Are there extra coding and things like that for elevators?
So it's a good question. The elevator itself, we'll just call it's about $100,000 for, say, a 4-stop elevator. That's not a huge number in the sense if you split that out over 10 or 12 units. It's $10,000, $8,000 per unit. So that's not a huge deal. But then your comment is correct, meaning that the parking gets impacted because we need some area for that. And then by the time you go to an elevator, it makes sense to put the next floor up there. So it was that, for us, it was that ripple effect, or right at the line where we could go there. But for tonight, we decided we wanted to see what at least these 4 options brought us and then have help from the community, or at least know where the pitfall is, so we could say, hey, in order to make workforce housing happen, we need to do 4 stories in this zone. And now we do some change for the spot zoning. So you're welcome. Anybody else? Go ahead, Uda. Yep.
Did you want to mention that the alternative building solution could also be dressed up in a way that you wouldn't see from the outside, that it's not a historical colonial building?
Yep, that's a good question. And for what Udo was saying is that as we played with some of these options in terms of the elevations that you've seen, we were trying to be keeping with the vernacular that's around here. And as I commented, at least at one point, was that if we kind of step a little bit away from the historic component and we decide to do something a little different, the opportunity would be that you could do metal siding here. And what Udo was saying is that in some of our discussions we talked about, and it's not drawn here, but if you put a gable roof on this with some dormers, that we could make this look like a traditional house in this particular neighborhoods. We decided not to do that because when we were going through the economic exercise, you add a dormer, you add $5,000. So each of those little pieces that you could use to create a cohesive architecture has a cost to it. And so our goal is to try to get down as much as we can to that workforce housing number. A couple other points too. The profit component that we have in these, we kind of use generally throughout all of the units. If we have a developer that is understanding and says, hey, I don't need to make 20% return on my investment, I'm happy with 6 or 8, then we can start to play with those numbers. But for all of these options, we created a benchmark so that we weren't necessarily comparing apples to orange and say, well, since this is a cheaper type of building, there's going to be a less of a profit. We decided to keep the profit consistent so we could test out the scenario. So again, as Robbie said, the numbers are where we all play with this, meaning that if we come back and if the piece of property can be purchased for less, or if we have a bank that's willing to take more of a risk and the carrying costs go down, then all of that stuff comes to the bottom line, and we might be able to move a $300,000 affordable housing component to a $280,000 or even a $270,000. So there's definitely a lot involved here.
Thank you. And I'm not sure if we're looking, maybe it's option 2. If we were to add a 4th story, a 4th level, because they have 3 levels, 3 stories.
Let's go, yeah, we'll stay right here. So this one's 3 stories.
Yeah. So so in your estimation, if we went to 4 levels, went up another story, we could then get additional units in.
Correct.
And reduce the overall the price point.
Correct.
Could it reduce it to our $307,000 level? $307.
Not quite. I mean,
But closer.
It could, yes, it definitely makes a difference. And as Robbie said, it's the parking that now kicks it.
So there's 2 components, is a restriction on how high you go up and the amount of parking that's required per unit play a big a role in the pricing. Now, I think you've also said that this is a challenging lot because it's only it's half an acre. So if this was a full acre lot, could we bring the price point down?
Yes.
So,
well, with one caveat, depending on what the price of that 1 acre lot is, because the land cost obviously for half an acre might be different than 1 acre. So we believe in our scenario that it would reduce, and that starts to tell us where it makes sense.
So a slightly bigger lot, though, might be able to bring us. Yeah, because also I think what's going to be visual is you got a half acre lot. So if you go up too high, you get this big mass in a very small area that's not spread out. So I think a big restriction is the half acre, and that's what you had to work with, and you did a great job doing that. But I think we have to maybe look at some of the options we have. If we want to do affordable housing, we want to make sure that we have a sizable enough piece of property to make it work. That's just a thought.
While the microphone's coming up to this gentleman, one of the comments too is that we like the idea of the density, and we talked about 30, 40, 50 units on a lot like this. Not ideal, but the concept of it starts to become sustainable because you have more people living in a smaller space, sharing all the utilities. So it's kind of a concept. But the problem is that more than likely no one in town is going to really like that. So we tried to come up with a concept that we felt was right on the edge of some people getting mad, but at the opportunity where we could have the discussion and work it through. So, yes, sir.
So my comment is, do you know of an acre lot near the downtown? I don't think they exist. Yeah.
We don't have to limit ourselves to affordable housing being in the downtown.
Well, here's one of the things you need to think
Or
about.
do we? Or is that what we're limiting ourselves to?
Not
Not
necessarily.
limiting, but focusing on.
As you move out of town, though, so let's say we found an acre of land that could be used for this, and it's out of town. What are the things that you're missing from downtown? Services. So in this instance, the water and sewer were really well. Yeah. Yep.
I can go out I can go out a mile or so and still have water, still have all the utilities.
Yeah. If you could find
Yeah.
a site with water and sewer right there, and it was an acre, and the surrounding locale would tolerate the density that we're talking about, because of course, as soon as you start moving out of the urban core, then nobody wants to see that kind of density.
True.
So there's it all. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and if I can just jump in, the reason that I'm so engaged is because this is in our urban core. And I care greatly about that, and I'd like to see more density, more people living very close to downtown. So that's why I'm pushing a little bit and saying, do you think we could get people who might not be necessarily inclined to go another floor and maybe let up a little bit on the parking restrictions? Do you think we could coax the town into doing that, Don? That's my question.
Yeah.
It's the abutters. I think they're the ones that are going to be more affected than you or I are.
You know, when you talk about urban infill, when you talk about urban infill, if you want to do market rate units, no problem, right? You can do it. We've seen it. But yeah, but the minute you try to spin the affordable portion of it, then that's where, you know, ideally we would like whatever we do to be all of it be affordable. But it's looking like if you stay within the height limitations that we have, that at best you're going to have market rate units and subsidizing some other non-market rate units.
One thing I think about, as I said, I live right around the corner, and there's already complaints and stuff in town about enough parking. So if you go up another floor and you have to add even more, there's not going to be enough parking. There isn't enough right now, so then what? Then the town's going to be complaining about. So that was my one thought. The other thoughts, I mean, I've got lots of thoughts. But I think this is very interesting. And, well, it's enough for now.
That's right.
Could I make a comment there? Then would you vote for the parking and traffic study that's going to be potentially going to be on the ballot in March?
I don't know, why not? How much is it going to cost? I mean, how many times have we had a parking study already?
We actually haven't had one.
haven't?
We did an anecdotal study with volunteers, but we've never paid to have one done. So would you vote for that?
I don't know. I'll have to see what else I have to vote for.
All right. So there's one other thought that we came up with that we kind of wanted to see how everybody reacted to this. If we were to look at the municipal lot that's out there now, so basically just on the other side of Szechuan Taste, in between Laney and Luz, excuse me, if we were to do something similar where we built basically a deck with parking that's there now, public parking, and then we figured out how many units made sense there, we do, again, another urban infill, larger site plan that we can work with, and then those people are actually probably better situated because it's within the commercial district right there. So in terms of as you start to spread out into the neighborhood where there's more residential, right there's quite a bit of commercial. So looking at other areas in town that already have a purpose, but we could potentially build on top of, that might be an opportunity as well. And so if we start to go and look at, you know, options like this where we say had the parking here and then units up above, or if we went to the container building component where you put these on top of a deck, now what happens is you can create basically a second level of an open park. In one of the versions that we did, it was version 5, we actually had 12 of these container homes on top of that parking deck. And so the opportunity of kind of looking at the alternative construction method over an existing area might be an option as well. And maybe you go up 3.5 or 4 stories because you've got some tall buildings in that immediate area, and then you step back as you head south on the property. So there's definitely some opportunities, and like I said earlier in the kind of beginning of the conversation, we didn't solve it like we had hoped to solve it. We hoped to give everybody a really cool opportunity example. But I think it's partly because of the site. I think it's partly because of the density, the zoning, the lot coverage, and how we approach it. And so I think that as the town of Exeter, you guys can help make some of those rules or change some of those rules, and maybe we can then bring affordable housing into that downtown. But it's going to be tough. So, especially in today's market with the prices of materials and everything. So, you have another question you're contemplating? You can tell.
Oh, going back to her comment, I mean, it looks to me like there's lots of space around the Epping Road. And I know there are some for affordable housing, which I don't think very much of. I don't think they're very attractive. But I mean, Epping Road is not far. I could walk to it from my house if I wanted. I'm not averse to, doing some things maybe in town, but I am adverse to losing any type of green space in town. And those trees are very important wherever they are. So I think that has to be considered, but if you put a lot of trees around whatever you would do, that would be helpful. And
I'd like, all great points, and I'd just like to remind everyone that our viewers as well that these are professional architects and designers and engineers and more, and they need a place to start the conversation. So what we present to you today is one site that is available, the owner made available to us, and this is a concept. And I think you said so beautifully, Shannon and team, and I do want to introduce our team to all of you too, that this is a huge accomplishment in understanding how and why things work, and perhaps how they become challenging as well. And as Shannon said, we like to leave you with tangible solutions and a tangible concept. In this exercise, I think what we're showing is a process and where the challenges lay and what has to be considered. So I think this work provides you with an enormous propelling into this discussion at your housing committee, your town hall meetings, and more.
the last thing I would say is I don't even remember where I heard about this, but I think it was just a little blurb or something. I could be wrong. But I think this is very interesting and something that I'd like to see hundreds of people here. I don't know if there could be a little better advertising and actually saying, you know, this is one concept is right here, Bow and Clifford, or so people know you're talking about in town, not who knows where. But I think this is very interesting and helpful.
I would suggest to you and anyone else who's interested to pop onto our website, www.seacoastwhc.org, and you'll see other Charrette reports and the outcomes of those reports as well.
Our tech guy, Bob, has loaded it to YouTube.
Yep, on YouTube and Facebook.
Yeah, so if you know someone that you think
YouTube
should...
and Facebook.
If you know someone that you think should see it, it will have Wednesday night stuff, and you're going to add tonight? Yep. So the whole thing will be available online for people to see.
You know, the press and marketing of this event is exactly as it has been handled in the last 3 years, 5 years, exactly. Every action step was identical. And some communities, one community last year, we had 126 people. Last week, we had 60 people. 2 years ago, we had a turnout similar to this. So I don't know why you don't have the turnout that you do, but through your social media platforms and your technology, at least you can share the message. And again, this is a concept. This isn't a selectman meeting, a board meeting. This is engaging the community in a dialogue and a process. And so you can begin forming engagement entities and having discussions in deeper levels as members of the community about how you move forward with workforce housing, middle market housing.
Right, if we had come tonight before you in the planning or the zoning board saying we were going to do something like the middle lower section, there would be 150 people here. So which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's kind of the concept that, we have to deal with all the time. And I think that with Robin and with the workforce housing, we have an opportunity to have fun and to play with some options that probably won't be built, but at least there's an opportunity for the towns that we deal with to see something tangible, and hopefully they use it. If they don't, at least we learn something out of the deal too. So it's actually quite fun. And then, does anybody else on the team want to say something? I know you guys are awful quiet in the back. All right. So I guess, unless there's anything else, any other questions from the group?
I'd like to give a few thank yous, if I may, yourself included, Shannon. I really want to underscore, this is a group of volunteers who now, at this hour, have been here about 12 hours, and that doesn't count the day before or yesterday as well. So on behalf of the Workforce Housing Coalition and the town of Exeter, thank you so much. I want to name you by name. I'm just so grateful, and I know the community is too. Shannon Alter, Robbie Woodburn, Maria Solari was our facilitator, George Regan was here from New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority, Mark Batchelder, John Shagnon, Carla Goodnight had signed on and then wasn't able to join us, but Vicki Martell is here, Jen Ramsey, Dave Sharples has been a part of the process for almost a year, Darren Winham too. We've had numerous meetings. Michael Castagna was your financial consulting expert. Rachel, I always pronounce your last name wrong, and I want to do it right. Rachel Ela from Optima Bank and Trust. I cannot tell you how helpful. Uta Luxem, who was our spokesperson, our voice of the Finance Committee, and although he wasn't here tonight, Andre, and I'm going to butcher his name, and I apologize to his parents, Papillon, and our scribe, Danny Ulray, and Sarah Garska, who will actually be crafting your written report. And then finally, in closing, again, I just have to go back and thank Optima, Riverwoods, Exeter Hospital, Exeter Area, Chamber of Commerce, Exeter Inn, Green Bean, Las Olas, and me and Ollie's, and all of you. Thank you all so much, and residents, thank you too for coming out tonight.